7, 8.
Yeah.
First Kings 8. You get that set up. Yeah, your riding buddy. Your riding buddy's home, but he wasn't up to coming today. Marvin. I have heard that some people do watch this, which bless their hearts, I think.
Jenny said your grand boy was baptized.
Yeah.
Good to hear that.
And his daughter-in-law.
Stepdaughter and
Well, stepdaughter. Yeah, sorry. Yes, that was exciting. Have a I don't know how often you get asked this. This is when we get to the text. I just throw it out there because it comes up from time to time. And to be honest, when I decided to get into preaching, the thing that concerned me the most was what if someone comes to me, especially a kid, and wants to be baptized? And it concerned me that people would be leaning on me to, and I get this all the time. People will say, well, my so-and-so talking about baptism. Can you talk to them? And I'll talk to them. And so I'll give them I think they're ready, or I don't think they're ready. And, that concerned me before I got into preaching. It's like, people are going to be leaning on me to, and then I had a conversation with my dad, and he was like, it's really not as hard as you think it is. And he went over some pointers with me about things that you should ask. And they're key highlights when you know if they're ready or not. So I figure before we start our normal thing, let's just throw that out there because it's timely. Like I say, we had one. What was interesting is Hayden answered the questions much better than Monica initially. And then as I talked to her more, she came around. But it was interesting because, it's not necessarily an age, but it's awareness and other things. So you have a kid, grandkid, or someone asked you, I've got this person. What do you do? And I thought Larry actually did pretty good with Hayden. But what kind of things do you need to talk to them about? How would you go about determining if someone was actually ready or not?
First off, they got to realize their condition.
Okay.
They're sin.
They got to realize they're lost. Now, I think that is an important one, and it's one that you should never discount too much. In fact, in this world we live, especially a lot of our kids or grandkids in this area, if they're in this area, they are brought up with their friends that go to, and I won't mention their names, but churches, we'll just loosely say that basically they will want to baptize them almost as young as possible. Now, they'll say that it should be a believer's baptism, but yet they seem to baptize them really, really young. And so most of your kids or grandkids around here, they're going to be around friends that maybe 6 to 8 years old that get baptized. And they don't know why they're doing it. They're doing it because, that's just something they do. And so, the question, another thing that I've seen a lot of, and that's just not just here, that's every place I've ever been. If there's a fairly good tendency to go to certain Bible camps, some Bible camps do a better job than others of, it's such an emotional state of these Bible camps that everybody just wants to, be in the crowd and do what their friends are doing and be whatever. uh, you know, I don't keep track of it because I don't really, it's not me. I mean, some preachers detail every baptism, every conversion, everything. I've never done that. It just, to me, it's not about me. It's about the individuals. And so if I keep a record of it, it almost seems like, I'm making it about what I've done, how good I've done. But anyway, I would dare say off my top of my memory, I've done a good number of, sometimes we label them rebaptisms. And, but basically they're just baptism for the right reason on the second one. But majority of my rebaptisms probably come from people that got baptized when they was at camp and they were too young, didn't know what they was doing. And then over, maybe 2 or 3 decades of thinking about it, they're like, baptism should be for a reason. I was lost. I need to understand that. And so, so that's probably what I've done. So, but so what, so that is definitely one of the things they need to understand, that they're lost. In fact, how I finally got to Monica to make sure she understood is I just flat out told her that and said, and saw what she thought about that, and then said, so would you go to heaven without being baptized today to have your sins washed away? And she said, no. I said, okay. So she started coming around. But so what are some other things? By the way, what do most kids, I don't know if you've been around kids that's asked this or not, what do you think most kids, especially if they're too young, what do you think they're going to give as a reason to be baptized?
What they're going to what?
What would they give as their reason for wanting to be baptized? Most little kids, what do they say?
I know what mine was.
What?
Because my older brother got baptized.
Okay, and so that is not that's obviously not a reason. It's kind of like, I don't put it this way, but it's like, go back, try it again. Think about it, come back again, because you don't really understand it yet. So that's, some people may say that, once again, their friends, their family or whatever. What's other things? What's without question, the biggest thing, and I really was surprised that Hayden didn't say this, to be honest. He did good in that, and that most younger kids, what they'll say,
Lying or stealing.
well, no, that's okay. Wait a second. We're getting to the second level there. That's a good level. Most kids never get to that second level because they simply say, "I want to do it because I want to, either do what Jesus wants. I want to, God says to do it, so I want to do it, or whatever." They frame it in a way where they think it's a good answer. God says to do it, so that's why I want to do it. And that's fine, but it misses out something. And so with that answer, any Baptist church would baptize you. Because in most of those churches, what is baptism actually not about?
It's not about remission of sin.
Yeah, it's not about salvation. So, you say you want to do it because it pleases God, or because, it's what the Bible says. That right there is fine. And because it doesn't actually put the onus on why. So if a kid can't really say why, they're not ready. If they can't say, because I'm lost in my sins, or in some way frame that, or if they can't personalize sins. So what do I mean when I say personalize sins?
Sin is taught us, we're to be baptized for the remission of our sins.
Right.
What I kind of view it as far as a child that's maybe 10 years old or nearly 10 years old, something like that. Even, do they understand exactly what sin is?
Well, some do, some don't. That's why that's why we're having this conversation.
Now,
so
I was about 10. I liked
Yes.
about, I don't know, 7 days, I think.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But there was one sin that I was doing that I knew was taught in the Bible not to do that.
Okay.
And if I got in trouble with whoever was taking care of me, I'd say, no, I didn't do that. I'd
Mhm.
lie about it.
Yeah.
And then I learned that lying was a sin, and you
Yes.
can't get into heaven if you
Right.
continue to
And
be a liar. You know?
yeah. So maybe you need to teach this class because you're right. And that is the step that they've got to be able to personalize, say, I've done this sin. Now, I want to tell you, it's not just kids. You've got to have, when I study with an adult, uh, that is a big point of doing that. You've got to personalize that sin. It's not, it's what I've done. And I need help to get rid of that. And so that should lead you there. So,
These churches that claim that they're baptizing babies, for instance, sprinkling a little water on their head. Well, that's
Yeah.
not baptism
no,
at all. But a baby can't even talk yet and
No.
tell you what sin is, and that's what you should be
but I know
baptized for.
in the past 20, 30 years, I have seen, in the Baptist churches, they always said it needs to be a believer's baptism, but yet their standard on what a believer is has really changed. So used to be the people that were being baptized in the Baptist church were about the similar age to what you'd see in churches of Christ. I've seen recently, past 20 years, where that age has become younger and younger and younger in the Baptist churches because their standard of what they consider a believer is not what it used to be. So it is indeed should be a believer's baptism, but to be a believer, you have to be able to exhibit faith, understand sin, when you're doing right, when you're doing wrong. So it's probably not, in many ways, it's not hard, but the problem is our emotions get into the picture. So we want our children to be baptized, right? I think we do. And so we sometimes will overlook because we just want to get them wet, but getting them wet really doesn't do what we think it does if it's not for the right reason. So what happens is it's probably good to get someone independent to see what they think. So I don't ever have any problem with talking to someone. Now, most of the time, I really like talking to them by myself, or if the parent or grandparent can just be quiet, because it. So I have seen. I don't make this mistake anymore, but I've made the mistake sometimes in the early days of preaching where I'd have someone like that in there, and as soon as I ask them a question, then the parent is feeding them the answer, and I'm like, kids are smarter than you think. They can regurgitate an answer that you give them. What I have also seen is much like I told Larry was talking to me about Hayden, and he went through their conversation, and I told Larry it's not going to be long now, because generally once they start that deeper level, not just that they want to do what their brothers do or do what they're, to please Jesus or whatever. Once they get that deeper level, it starts weighing on them. And then they generally figure it out. Now, I will say this. I think sometimes we worry too much about the little kids and getting them to that point. And to me, it's always been more about awareness, because kids that are baptized sometimes at younger age than an older age, if you went throughout the things, I guarantee it, if you had an independent person, not religious, a lot of the ones that are baptized at a little bit older age, even when they were young, an independent person say, well, that person's a more mature kid. They do what's right more. They do this and that. It has no rhyme or reason to that, though. It's an awareness issue. Now, one thing that sometimes I've seen we do is we can push it so much on a little kid that I think it almost eliminates some of their childhood, being a kid. Because once they have that switch turned, it's kind of like, so what all happened when Adam and Eve ate that forbidden fruit? What did they become aware of?
Their sin.
Their sin. Okay. So when a kid has that flip switched, that switch flipped, all of a sudden they realize, the consequences and the right and wrong deal. And so I'm not judging anybody that ever deals with the young kids, but I want to say it generally is better when it happens almost naturally. You teach them, you make sure they're in classes that have it. They'll hear it in the sermon and stuff. And when it's organic, that's the way it should be. They basically are probably should. But anyway, anybody have any thought on that?
Shed some light on some things I heard yesterday.
Uh-huh. Oh, really? Yeah. Okay.
Had a little coffee.
Okay. Afterwards, in private. Yeah, I understand. Yeah. So,
I mean, here, y'all, I know you are because you're teachers.
And what
You aware of the demerit system
demerit system?
at
Yes.
school? That's what I think triggered a lot of this.
oh, well, yeah, it can.
I
Yeah.
thought I turned that off.
I found out.
You probably got an extended car warranty.
I found out yesterday.
Yeah. That trigger got him thinking.
Last week he got
Yeah.
like 3 demerits because he wouldn't shut his mouth.
Well,
Teacher
that's-
just wrote him up big time.
and that can happen, and I still I think that's the organic way, and so it should be more of an organic process for a kid. Now, at some point, obviously, they get a certain age. It's like, okay, they're there. Although that can even be a little difficult because there's a lot of other factors. But still, at some point, you don't. It's like when I'm talking to an adult, there's certain things I don't ask them because I know they understand certain things. But anyway, so I just thought I'd take some time to talk about that because it is it's one of the things I do as a preacher, probably more than anything, is talk to kids and evaluate if they're ready. Now, I'm not going to say everybody always listens to me, and that's fine. That they're the parent, but for the most part, they do. At least they take it into account. But I'm not going to say, the thing is, baptism is for a purpose. So if someone's not baptized for the right purpose, then it really wasn't any different than what you see in the denominational. Leading into that, another subject that's kind of related. So some people have, I think, a overly strict thought on baptism if someone was maybe baptized in a denominational setting, say. And you treat it the same way. I know there's one guy that I did a Bible study with him, my typical Bible study, and I got to the point, I talked all about the sin and all this type of stuff, and anyway, we went through the whole study, went through, all these weeks of study, and then got close to the end, and I didn't say anything to him, and always have him write down on a board or a piece of paper, okay, what did you do the day you were saved? And to my shock and surprise, guess what he said? He said, I'd been thinking about it. I went to my preacher or whatever, and I told him I need to be baptized for the remission of my sins. And I'm like, oh, okay. And so I was like, interesting. So I said, well, what kind of church was it? And it was some type of independent, very conservative Baptist church. And they had some other things that were wrong, and he admitted that. But as far as his baptism, it was done in the right way. So, when somebody's done like that, by the way, it's a very much a case-by-case sitting because someone that's brought up in a traditional Baptist church and it's taught the wrong way, without question, it never is the case usually that they were baptized for the right reasons, because they just weren't simply taught that. Every now and then you run into a exception that says, "No, I knew I needed to be baptized. I didn't care what they said." But that's very rare. And so when someone comes and they were baptized in a denominational world, we always generally have a pretty good conversation with them. And ultimately, who's the only one that actually knows why they were really baptized for? The person and God. And so ultimately, you can't, I don't see it's my place to put judgment on it because I don't know. But so we go through it, and if they give the right answers, that's
These kids that are baptized early, so to speak, maybe
Mhm.
those of us that are adults, especially their parents, needs to continue constantly to make sure they're come to church
Yes, I
as
think
much as possible.
come to church as much as possible, and
And then when they get here in our Bible classes, teach them what they need to know from the point that they got baptized right on through into something that is more that that they need to know about baptism and the sins and so on and so forth, so that as they grow up, they will maybe be able to resist a lot of this.
now that's the same though, whether they're 10 or 100.
Right.
They need that immediately afterwards. So
all of us need to encourage them.
but I'm saying, if you were a 50-year-old person that studied and was baptized, as soon as possible, you need to be taught further, and you need to be in church as much as possible. So it's the same. It goes the same. But sometimes we may think we don't have to worry. But, it's like, one of the things I talked to Hayden about was I said, well, you're going to need to come to the teen class on Wednesday nights now. And
I was using myself as a personal example of what I was trying to get over. I was fortunate enough to be raised in a Christian atmosphere every day.
Right.
And I think that has added to my attitude about Christianity.
Yes, most definitely. Okay, well, let's go ahead and get back to, unless somebody else has anything, to 1 Kings 8. We kind of did this, and my understanding, y'all kind of got a little sidetracked. We've got sidetracked here, so I don't no judgments on that. That happens, and that's fine. Nothing wrong with that. But anyway, we talked about the temple is now built in 1 Kings 8, and when they're going to have it, basically it was on the Feast of Booths or Tabernacles, which tents is really what we're talking about. They would have all these tents come in and occupy. It looked like a big, huge campground. I'm sure nothing, and it was to pay homage, reflect back on the way they were in the wilderness, basically all that time traveling, and so that was one of the three main feasts where all males had to attend, and so as a result, that was a good time. We talked about that. It's a good time to open the temple up. It was built in time where they could celebrate, observe the Feast of Booths, the Feast of Tents, then. And so it became a good time because that's when everybody would already be there anyway. And so anyway, it goes on. And so then they took up the ark, the priest did. It has to be someone of the Levite tribe. Now, some might say, wait a second, I thought it was supposed to be Levites. Well, what tribe were the priests in? They were in tribe of Levi. Now, priests specifically had to be a son of Aaron, but they also were of the tribe of Levi. So a priest is a Levite. A Levite's not a priest necessarily. So it just kind of works that way. So they took it into the tent of meeting and took the vessels. The priest in verse 6. let's see, in verse 6. It says, "Then the priest brought the ark of the covenant of the Lord to its place in the inner sanctuary of the house, in the most holy place, underneath the wings of the cherubim. For the cherubim spread out their wings over the place of the ark, so that the cherubim overshadowed the ark and its poles." Now, slightly different. This seems to be more of a permanent structure, these cherubim, than the way it was in the tabernacle or the tent of meeting. But still basically the same cherubim. They had the thing. It says, "And the poles were so long that the ends of the poles were seen from the holy place before the inner sanctuary." So what separated the holy place from the most holy place? A curtain. Yeah, a veil, a curtain. Probably a big, thick curtain. By the way, one thing that your images, your thoughts in your mind, and maybe even some things you've seen is how colorful some of this stuff was. Even the tabernacle. The tabernacle wasn't just a dull gray kind of color. It had many colors and fabrics and other things. So it was very beautiful in that standpoint. So, but anyway, this veil, now this curtain, that thing. So we know about the curtain because what happened in the when Jesus, when the moment he died, what happened to that? It split in two, top to bottom. And it was a very impressive thing because it was about 40 feet, I think, tall, the temple. And so it was, I don't have any curtains that are 40 foot tall. Do you? That's a big curtain. But anyway, it split in two. But these poles that they carried, by the way, this Ark of the Covenant, it was designed to have these rings built into the sides, and they put these poles in, and the Levites would carry it. But the most holy place was so small that the poles actually stuck out behind the curtain. That was how the poles were wider than the most holy place was deep, and it wasn't very big. We've talked about that. Your thoughts probably of the size. Just for example, we pointed out that our main church building is more than twice as big as the temple was. Not as high; it was taller, but as far as just square footage, it's more than twice as big. So it was very ornate because very expensive. Had all these gems and stuff, different places, and they had gold, like the Ark of the Covenant. It was overlaid with gold. It was made of acacia wood, but it was overlaid in gold inside and out. Every inch of it was covered with gold. And much of the temple itself was covered with gold. And gold was expensive back then, and it's expensive today, too. Could you imagine, I don't know, any of y'all do woodwork? I've always thought that would be neat to get into woodworking stuff, but I've never had the tools nor the time to really, devote to that. But could you imagine building yourself like a little box, maybe a thing to store quilts or something, whatever you want to store in. But, right before you get done and say, I could paint it. I could stain it. I'm going to put gold everywhere around it. I don't think anybody thinks that way because it'd be so expensive. It'd be heavy too. I mean, you can imagine how heavy that would make the thing. So anyway, they bring it in. For the cherubim spread out their wings over the place, the ark, so the cherubim overshadowed the ark and its poles. And the poles were so long that the ends were seen from the holy place before the inner sanctuary, but they could not be seen from the outside. So they weren't that long. They were longer than the most holy place was, but they obviously weren't long enough to where you could see it from outside the building. And they were there. They were there to this day. Now, what does that mean? So you could see these poles sticking out just a hair. But what does it mean they were there to this day? A lot of times you'll see something like that in Scripture, in the Old Testament, where it'll say, it's there to this day. What does that mean? It's there to this day. What day? It's not there now.
as of this writing.
As of this writing. So whoever wrote the Book of Kings, we've got it divided in First and Second Kings. Whoever wrote that, when they wrote it, it was still there. Now, it doesn't even mean it was still there during their lifetime, because there are many people that believe Jeremiah wrote the Book of Kings. Well, Jeremiah, at his first part of writing the book of Jeremiah, the temple was still intact, but at some point during the book of Jeremiah, that changes. So all we know is, we don't know for sure Jeremiah wrote this, but if he did, he wrote this and finished this part before it was gone. So in other words, you'd come to the temple, and even on the regular basis, the priests that would come into the holy place, they could see these poles sticking out through the curtain. In the New Testament, nothing said about that. Why? What was different about the New Testament's temple? There was 3 temples built. Solomon's temple, Zerubbabel's temple, which Zerubbabel's temple was very much a bare bones. It was a poor man's temple, you might say. And then Herod's refurbishment and, bringing it back to its kind of, really amazing status. What was different about Zerubbabel's temple and Herod's temple? Why wouldn't you have seen poles sticking out through the curtain?
No most holy place.
Well, there was still a most holy place,
Just
but
no
what
ark.
was lacking from it?
Just no ark.
No ark. Okay, so there was no ark. So it didn't have the poles because there was no ark there, so there'd be nothing sticking out. But during this time, until somewhere about the time they're taken into captivity, just know that these poles would have been sticking out. So I think it's kind of interesting, because that would have gave you a understanding of what's behind the curtain. Now, why do you think they left the poles in? Huh?
Support.
It really needs support. So when they take it to the Ark of the Covenant, they would take the poles out. Why do you think they just left the poles in there this time? What was the poles for?
Transport.
Transport. So why did they just leave them in there this time? It's not going anywhere again. Not supposed to go anywhere. So it's kind of part of the Ark of the Covenant, and so they just left it in there. Okay, let's keep going now in verse 8. And the poles were so long. Okay, we read that. It says in verse 9, we're going to talk about this a little while. It says, there was nothing in the ark except the 2 tablets of stone that Moses put there at Horeb, or Mount Sinai. That basically, it's kind of like, you've got mountain peaks, and you got the Ouachita Mountains, the Ozark Mountains, and then you got individual peaks. So Horeb and Sinai were much like that. So anyway, it says, except the tablets of stone that Moses put there, where the Lord made a covenant with the people of Israel, and they came out of the land of Egypt. Okay. Is there maybe something that seems to be missing? By the way, these tablets of stone, what did they have on? Okay. That is actually right. Yeah, they had the Decalogue, the 10 Commandments. They did not have all the law of Moses on. One, we know that because when they were originally placed in there, we hadn't got to that point yet. They were placed in there and into Exodus, and there's stuff written in some of the other books that go past that point. Also, you couldn't have fit all that on stone; it would have been too large. So it was the 10 Commandments. But there's things that seem to be missing. So what is missing? See if y'all remember from maybe your Bible class days or whatever. So the stone of the 10 Commandments was inside the Ark of the Covenant. What else at some point was put into the Ark of the Covenant? By the way, God told them to put it there, so it wasn't like they did it on their own. By the way, the Ark of the Covenant was maybe 3.5 foot wide, long. I don't think it's quite that deep. So
How long is that?
yeah, it would have been at least that, because we're going to get into something that was in there. So what all was in there? It might have even been up to 48 inches. Almost 4 feet, close to 4 feet, basically. So what else was in there besides the tablets of stone?
Aaron's rod.
Aaron's rod that budded.
Budded.
Yes, and so it was placed in there, and we won't take time to read it, but Numbers 17, 1 through 11. So Aaron's rod that budded was in there. What else was in there?
Can't remember the other.
It was a pot. They put something in the pot.
What are you asking now?
What all was in the original Ark of the Covenant? And when we read Moses,
Aaron's rod and a pot of manna.
pot of manna. There you go. So they took some of the manna in one of these excursions, and they sealed it up, put it in there. Why do we not hear about them here?
They're not there.
They're not there. I mean, that's the best way to say it. They're not there. So, and to know about some of this, you need to understand some of the history of the ark. It was stolen for a while by the Philistines. It wasn't in the right place. And so they're not there anymore. And so we don't know what happened to them, but they weren't there. What happened to the Ark of the Covenant? We don't have it. Like I said, we said that it's no longer, the temple that Jesus went to, the priest that, say, Zacharias, John the Baptist's dad, when he went in there, he didn't see the poles. And we said it's because the Ark of the Covenant wasn't there. What happened to the Ark of the Covenant? Y'all don't know? Well, we don't really know. I mean, so was it there when Nebuchadnezzar destroyed everything? Maybe he destroyed the Ark Covenant with it, because the big difference is God's presence left at some point. We read that in Ezekiel. So it didn't have that mojo it had, all along. When the Israelites would carry it into battle, and God said, "Do it." Or it could have been taken out of the thing. Somebody may have kept it for a while, and it just eventually got destroyed. Somebody may have melted it down. Remember, gold, a lot of gold. I mean, you think about 4 foot by, maybe 18 inches, 1.5 foot, or maybe 2 foot, and then inside, outside, that's quite a bit of gold. That'd make a lot of money. So maybe somebody melted it down and burned the wood. Who knows? But we don't know is the right answer. We don't know. God didn't record what happened to it because it was meaningless after what took place in Ezekiel. And so it was destroyed, or it's been lost. I guess if you're a believer in Indiana Jones movie, it's some warehouse in the U.S., but no, I firmly believe it's been destroyed over the years. You'll not find any piece of it. And I think that's fine, because think about what people would do if they, even just a little piece they found, and they could somehow verify it was, it would be they would make such a big deal. Remember the brazen serpent became worshipped as an idol at some point in time. The ephod that
Aaron rod.
oh goodness, what's his name? One of the judges, Gideon, the Gideon war, that somebody made for him. They hung it up and worshipped it like an idol. And so what would people do if they found the Ark of the Covenant today? It'd be in some shrine, and they would worship it. No, that's not the way it's to be. It never was to be that way. So anyway, needless to say, they weren't there. But think about, it's been almost 1,000 years, I believe. Well, probably not that long, 700-800 years since the original tablets were put there. So those tablets are still there. That would have been amazing. But the only person to get to see it, and I don't think they got to see it because it was just in there. So basically, it never got touched. So it was just in there. But anyway, so they put so all it has is 2 tablets. It says, and when the priest came out, verse 10, of the holy place, a cloud filled the house of the Lord. So the priest could not stand to minister because of the cloud, for the glory of the Lord filled the house of the Lord. And then in verse 12, then Solomon said, the Lord has said that he would dwell in thick darkness. I've indeed built you an exalted place, a place for you to dwell in forever. And the king turned around and blessed all the assembly of Israel while the assembly of Israel stood. And he said, blessed be the Lord and the God of Israel, who with his hand has fulfilled what he promised with his mouth to David my father, saying, since the day I have brought my people Israel out of Egypt, I chose no city out of all the tribes in Israel in which to build a house, that my name might be there, but I chose David to be over my people Israel. And then in verse 17, that was in the heart of David my father to build a house for the name of the Lord. But when the Lord said to David my father, whereas it was in your heart to build a house for my name, you did well that it was in your heart. Nevertheless, you shall not build the house, but your son, who shall be born to you, shall build the house for my name. Now the Lord has fulfilled his promise that he made, for I have risen in the place of David my father and sit on the throne of Israel, as the Lord promised. And I have built the house of Israel for the name of the Lord God of Israel. And there I have provided a place for the ark, in which the covenant of the Lord that he made with our fathers when he brought them out of the land of Egypt. And so then in 22 on, we'll see a prayer and dedication that Solomon does. What I want to do in just a few moments, though, is I want to compare this a little bit to something else. So, what took place in this temple once the ark was there and the priests left? What happened? God's presence filled in that most holy place. And so when Zerubbabel rebuilds the temple, after the 70 years of captivity, did this happen? No. Well, why didn't it happen? What was missing? Once again, I think it was destroyed. The Ark of the Covenant, which was, so if you notice, that the whole purpose was that this was a house for the Ark of the Covenant because that's where God's presence was figuratively set to be. And so without the Ark of the Covenant, you didn't have the same, it wasn't the same, okay? Now, Herod's temple, same way. There's no process where God filled this. There's nothing that takes place. It's also why, when it was destroyed, it's destroyed. And, it could be replicated, but it can never be what it was once. So anyway, so the temple had that. But I want us to look back. Let's go back to Exodus 40.
Exodus 40.
40, yeah. Last chapter in Exodus. By the way, I may have said this, but technically that's not correct. So it wasn't the original tablets, was it? What happened to the original tablets?
Moses cast down.
And then he ground it up. What did they have to do to it? Had to drink it. Because they'd made that golden calf and other things. So anyway, so the tabernacle is finally erected. And a lot of this is the same process. they had to take in, the last step was kind of taking the Ark of the Covenant into this most holy place. By the way, the temple and the tabernacle are very, very similar as far as in the actual dimensions of the working functional parts. And then in verse 34, it says of Exodus 40, and let's see, I don't know if I can get there or not. Oh, I did. Okay. Okay. So about verse 34. The glory of the Lord, it says, then the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. And Moses was not able to enter the tent of the meeting because the cloud settled on it. And the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Now, Moses was kind of I guess you might say, the project manager of this tabernacle. So God would tell him what to do. He'd give the instructions to the various people. And then, even while it's being constructed and it's put up, he's making sure it's exactly what God wants. As soon as that Ark of the Covenant is put in and he leaves, he can't go back in. Why could Moses not go back in? Well, we're going to see this, but we don't see another instance too where Moses entered into the tabernacle once it was set up again. Why? Why could Moses not enter the tabernacle after this? Who was the only ones that could enter this inner parts of the tabernacle? Priest. What was Moses not? Not even a priest at all. Yeah. So anyway, but let's get to 36 says, throughout all their journeys, whenever the cloud was taken up from over the tabernacle, the people would set out. So how did they know when it was time to move?
That cloud would raise up.
Yeah. But if the cloud was not taken up, they did not set out till the day that it was taken up. For the cloud of the Lord was on the tabernacle by day, and fire was in it by night. So the cloud even had some fire to it at nighttime.
That the same glory that was with them as they left the land of Egypt.
Yes. In the night of all the house of Israel throughout all their journeys. And that is the end of Exodus. And so I do find that interesting. And so we see a lot of similarities in that the glory did fill the presence. The biggest difference is the temple was a permanent structure, whereas the tabernacle was meant to be transported, to be taken around. Since you brought that up, let's turn to 1 Corinthians 10, because it alludes to that, this glory of God, this, what was it that led them? So if you turn to 1 Corinthians 10, I'll wait till y'all get there. Okay, we all there?
Just about.
Okay.
Yes, the page to turn. One more page.
Okay, so 1 Corinthians 10. Okay, so there Paul writes, for I do not want you to be unaware, brothers, that our fathers were all under the cloud and all passed through the sea. Now, when did they do that?
Right after leaving Egypt.
Okay, what sea is this that they're passing through?
When Moses was leading them out of captivity, and
so it's the Red Sea
dead.
And red.
Yeah, red.
And he parted the waters, and they went through dry land, but to left side was a wall of water, right side was a wall of water. What was over top of them?
Cloud.
The cloud that led them. And so by day. And so They were covered with water. What would we call that when you're immersed?
Baptism.
Baptism. So it was a form of baptism in Moses. It was a different, not obviously the baptism, but that did lead them out of bondage. It led them out of the ties of the Egyptians, much like baptism into Christ leads you out of sin. Okay. And all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and sea, and all ate the same spiritual food, and all drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from the spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. Nevertheless, with most of them, God was not pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness. So, anyway, so main thing is who was actually leading them?
God will.
Well, God was, but specifically, Paul says it was Christ. Anyway, we can talk about that some other time, but the angel of Jehovah, I believe, was probably the pre-incarnate Christ. And here Paul specifically says that it was Christ who led them. And it also makes sense too, because what do we know about God the Father? What was said about who has seen God the Father?
No man.
No man. Okay. So no man. Well, but we see different times this angel Jehovah would be seen by individuals. But yet this angel Jehovah spoke as God. Now, Christ is technically a title. It means anointed one, same as Messiah. Jesus was the name. It just means, one who saves. But it's also, from a linguistic standpoint, the same name as Joshua. But this Jesus Christ wouldn't have had a name per se in the Old Testament times, because that name was once Jesus became flesh and blood on this earth, although he'd lived for all eternity backwards. Okay. Any thoughts or comments? I do find it fascinating. It's very similar, though, this process. And they sacrificed. It said it was unnumbered. Couldn't number all the animals they sacrificed. What a mess that must have been, and what a I'm sure the meat probably smelt pretty good, but it was probably, and many of us would probably think a little bit of a sickening sight, seeing all that blood and the entrails being removed and cast out, and wasn't a very glamorous picture. But such was the case. But we're told that it was a pleasing aroma to God when that's done. And so anyway, we have the completion of David's work, really, if you get down to it. Because David is the one that really wanted to do this. God chose the place to put it, and where David had moved, made the kingdom, and the capital, and Jerusalem became the name where God was. And so from here forward, where did they come for their feast days? They're 3 times a year. They came to Jerusalem. And so from here on out, it's always Jerusalem where they're going. Okay. By the way, there's a lot of gaps. We don't know how diligently they observed certain things prior to this time. It could be that it was kind of intermittent. It could be they didn't observe for years, because we know from after this that sometimes happens. In fact, they misplaced the book, the Law of Moses. And so anyway, and it was found later. They said, "Oh, we're not doing the right. We're not doing what we should." So anyway, any thoughts on that? The tabernacle and the temple are very similar, especially the original temple, the one that Solomon built. No other temple was quite the same as Solomon's temple, not just in the standpoint of how magnificent it was, but from the standpoint of God's presence and what it meant. So that's just there to ponder. But anyway, any thoughts or comments? If not, I'm going to go ahead and stop the streaming. And